Hey, welcome back to Metal Potatoes. We are continuing our discussion of the Iron Maiden studio albums, ranking them from least favorite to favorite. We did the first nine last time. We're going to do the top 10 this time. So let's get right to it. Thanks for hanging out. Fear of the Dark. If No Prayer for the Dying was an album made by a band facing a creative crisis, Fear of the Dark is an album made by a band that is absolutely running on fumes. The glory days of the new wave of British heavy metal are almost 10 years in the rearview mirror by this point. Thrash had arrived in the mid 80s. The street level rock of Guns N' Roses followed a couple years after that. By 92, grunge had reared its flannel clad head, and Maiden's tales of melodic daring do were most decidedly uncool. To make matters worse, the band had already lost Adrian Smith and now lead singer Bruce Dickinson, tiring of what he perceived as resting on past glories, was also soon to leave the band. It was evident that something needed to change, but what? All of Maiden's core strengths, progressive songwriting, dual guitar harmonies, lyrics based on horror and war movies, were now considered passe. So Maiden tried everything and nothing. By that, I mean that they mixed up their sound and their approach to songs and lyrics on some songs. On others, they stuck to their guns and stayed the course. With a couple of exceptions, neither approach really worked. As to the former, Maiden tried their first ever power ballad in Wasting Love, and no, Strange World doesn't count. They tried boogie woogie stripper metal and Chains of Misery. They tried what Martin Popoff likes to call Heartland rock with Weekend Warrior. None of them really worked, although Wasting Love came awful close. As to the latter, most of the attempts at a classic Maiden song come across as forced. From Here to Eternity tries to mix up the street level verse of something like 22 Acacia Avenue with the soccer stadium chant chorus of countless classic Maiden songs. It's a good effort, but it just doesn't really work. The same can be said of Afraid to Shoot Strangers. Although now that I think about it, that song is a bit more forward looking to the medieval folk tinged music of the Bailey and post reunion years. Still, there are some real gems here, and it's a testament to Maiden's creative process that even in times of band turmoil, they can throw down a banger like the title track. Fear of the Dark, the song, is a stone cold Maiden classic. It rightfully claims its place at the highest level of Maiden material, right up there with Hallowed Be Thy Name and Phantom of the Opera. Not only is it still in their set list, the crowds go fucking berserk when it kicks in. Every time I go to a Maiden concert, the crowd chants the opening guitar melody and it gives me chills every time. Not quite on the same level, but still great is Judas My Guide. It's got guitar harmonies, a driving beat, and a melody that you can hum to while you bang your head. It's not power metal, but it's pretty damn close. Similarly, Be Quick or Be Dead is Maiden looking backwards, but absolutely capturing that early essence. Fear the Dark is a transitional album, and frankly, it's not one of their best. It's still worth a listen for a couple reasons. First, you can hear in real time the band struggling with their legacy and testing the waters and trying out new things, some of which will end up as Maiden trademarks on later albums. The parts that don't work, but the parts that do work positively fucking soar. The Book of Souls. Next to Brave New World, this is my favorite post reunion album, hands down. Whereas albums like Fear of the Dark felt a little piecemeal, this album is fully realized. The tracks flow into and complement each other in a way Maiden hasn't pulled off since A Matter of Life and Death. From the a cappella intro of If Eternity Should Fail to the soft piano exit of Empire of the Clouds, the album plays like a cohesive whole. And the highlights, there are so many. Speed of Light comes close to capturing Maiden's new wave of British heavy metal sound, punctuated by a classic Dickinson yowl. The Red and the Black starts with what may be a Maiden first, a chorded solo played on acoustic bass by Steve Harris. It quickly transitions into a patented Maiden triplet and continues as the band paints a wonderful 13-minute long musical tapestry. The title track would be right at home on Bruce Dickinson's masterful solo album, Chemical Wedding. And as a side note, If Eternity Should Fail is also on his latest album, The Mandrake Project. The band flirts with melodies similar to Zeppelin's Kashmir, while Bruce lays a beautiful vocal melody on top. Death or Glory returns us again to that Maiden mainstay, aerial combat. Unlike a song like Tail Gunner, this song feels more inspired and immediate and not just a retread. Tears of a Clown is a tribute to the late Robin Williams. An odd choice for a Maiden song, but hey, Robin Williams was great. If Maiden wants to write a song about him, who am I to say no? But the absolute coup de grace here arrives in the album's last song, an 18-minute masterpiece called Empire of the Clouds. As for Maiden, on its surface, it's about a piece of history. This time, an experimental air dirigible flight from the 1930s that ended in tragedy. And again, as for Maiden, underneath the surface lie some truths about humanity. Bruce Dickinson could sing the ingredients to a packet of Twinkies and make it sound heartfelt. And when he puts his pipes behind a message he believes in, the results can be devastating. Here, when he delivers the lesson to the whole thing, the dreamers may die, but the dream lives on. I just can't help but be moved. Dickinson recorded the entire album with a cancerous lump in his lymph nodes. No, I'm not going to make a cheap lump in your throat pun here. Like the trooper that he is, well, I am going to make a trooper pun. Not only did he finish the recording before getting it removed, he really fucking nailed it. Empire of the Clouds might be Maiden's greatest epic, rivaling, if not exceeding, Rhyme the Ancient Mariner in my opinion. But it's not the only reason that this album ranks so high on the list. Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. Here we go. The first of the quote unquote classic Maiden albums. Bruce Dickinson sat out of the writing process on his predecessor, Somewhere in Time, as he and the band were at a bit of a crossroads. Allegedly, Bruce, feeling that the Maiden formula had been perfected in Power Slave, thought that they should broaden their sound by exploring some different musical textures. Steve Harris was in the school of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Reportedly, the material that Dickinson was bringing was a bit too far out of the Maiden wheelhouse and it wasn't used. It was also around this time that Bruce started thinking about finding another outlet for his creative endeavors. This would result ultimately in Tattooed Millionaire, his first solo album, recorded while he was still with Maiden. Apparently, he was approached by Steve Harris, who had the idea to make the band's seventh album a concept album. What's the topic? Why Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, of course. Dickinson dutifully began writing songs around a central storyline, while Harris decided to write some songs dealing with the concept while others would stand on their own. The result is an album that only sometimes holds together thematically, but musically it flows perfectly. Like A Matter of Life and Death a couple decades later, the sequencing on this album could not be better. From the opening acoustic strums of Moonchild to the closing acoustic strums of Only the Good Die Young, Seventh Son is one of the great musical gifts, an album that is meant to be listened to as an album. Look, there are a lot of things that suck about getting old. Being alive at a time when streaming wasn't a thing but albums were is not one of them. I remember picking this one up. Can't remember if it was on CD or cassette, popping it in the player in my bedroom and listening to it from end to end while studying the lyric sheet. Great times those were. Unlike an album like Operation Mindcrime, I could never quite make out the story here. Whether that has to do with the fragmented writing or my own stupidity, I could never determine. Musically, it's classic Maiden, although you can start to get a whiff that something might be a little off. While the trademark gallop, soaring vocals, searing dual guitars, and themes of fantasy and warfare are all here, there's also a sense that the fuel gauge is running a little low. Don't get me wrong, there's some killer shit on this album. Moonchild, Can I Play With Madness, and the title track are all Maiden classics. But for the first time, we're confronted with more than one or two tracks that flirt with filler material. The chorus on The Evil That Men Do is repeated a couple dozen times too many, the prophecy sounds a little forced, and Only the Good Die Young, despite its sing-along chorus, seems a bit meandering. Despite that, even on the weaker tracks, Maiden is fucking strong. Just listen to Steve Harris's mini solo in Only the Good Die Young for evidence of that. So while it doesn't hit as hard as, say, Peace of Mind, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is a fine album and worthy of its designation as a Maiden classic. Brave New World. This album ranks as high as it does for reasons historical, musical, and personal. First, a bit of history. After Bruce left the band in 1993, both he and Maiden rebooted their respective careers. Maiden largely ditched the overt bombast of their classic albums for a darker, more stripped down approach. The albums with Blaze on vocals stepped away from power anthems like Aces High and focused more on deliberate, almost folksy songs like Sign of the Cross and Angel and the Gambler. Dickinson, now unconstrained from what he felt was a formula, struck out in a number of different directions in his solo career. He flirted with grunge on Skunkworks, beat-driven alternative metal on Balls to Picasso, and ultimately back to classic metal with the criminally underrated and overlooked classic Chemical Wedding. Both Bruce and Maiden were spreading their musical wings and seeing what they could do in the new musical landscape. It didn't really work out for either of them. It was the 90s. For those of you who weren't there, not only was Maiden's style of metal, what we would now call classic metal, out of fashion, but anything adjacent to it was deemed terminally uncool. The rise of grunge and alternative rock was an extinction-level event for bands like Iron Maiden. Even though Dickinson tried his hardest to separate himself from his past, the public wasn't buying it. Ultimately, both acts suffered via sluggish album sales and poorly attended shows. After the public got sick of grunge, Britpop, techno, and nu metal, classic metal slowly began rising from its slumber in the late 90s and early 2000s, although it really wouldn't reach a proper resurgence until the middle of the first decade of the new century. Regardless, both Maiden and Bruce saw the writing on the wall. Despite both of them releasing some solid music, the public wasn't buying Maiden without Bruce, and they weren't buying Bruce without Maiden. Blaze Bayley, through no fault of his own, was shown the door, and Bruce was back. The band could have taken the easy road and did a retread of the classic style, recorded an album that sounded like Power Slave, released it, and lived happily ever after. Instead, in true Maiden fashion, they stuck to their guns and did something different. Brave New World does pay tribute to classic Maiden in the form of the absolutely stunning Wicker Man and The Mercenary. It also explores some of the musical direction the band took in the 90s with songs like Blood Brothers and Dream of Mirrors. And it covers new ground in songs like the powerful title track and Ghost of the Navigator. These songs mix the medieval folk flavor of the 90s Maiden with a touch of power metal and Bruce's soaring voice. It's an approach that they've stuck to for the last couple of decades. It marks the emergence of a band that is older, wiser, and not afraid to take their listeners to new places. It's a statement of where the band was in that moment, as well as a statement of where they were planning on taking things. Quite a few listeners hopped off the Maiden train after this album, claiming that it doesn't sound like the old stuff. The old stuff is still there if you want to listen to it. This is a band who has earned the right to grow their sound. Let them. Finally, there are two words that explain my love for this album better than any others: Wicker Man. Christopher Lee is my favorite actor of all time, and The Wicker Man might be my favorite Christopher Lee movie. If you've never seen it, you gotta watch it. Be forewarned, it's weird. How weird? Well, it's a horror musical, but not like Rocky Horror. It takes itself deadly seriously. It's a fantastic treatise on power, religion, and belief. It also takes place in Scotland, and Scotland fucking rules. Do not watch the Nicolas Cage version because it is shit. So, despite the fact that Iron Maiden's Wicker Man song has little or nothing to do with the film, it features a Wicker Man prominently in the video, and Bruce would get burned alive in it at the end of every set of the tour. I saw the video before hearing the album and was immediately hooked. Objective? Probably not, but there you go. Brave New World. This album ranks as high as it does for reasons historical, musical, and personal. First, a bit of history. After Bruce left the band in 1993, both he and Maiden rebooted their respective careers. Maiden largely ditched the overt bombast of their classic albums for a darker, more stripped down approach. The albums with Blaze on vocals stepped away from power anthems like Aces High and focused more on deliberate, almost folksy songs like Sign of the Cross and Angel and the Gambler. Dickinson, now unconstrained from what he felt was a formula, struck out in a number of different directions in his solo career. He flirted with grunge on Skunkworks, beat-driven alternative metal on Balls to Picasso, and ultimately back to classic metal with the criminally underrated and overlooked classic Chemical Wedding. Both Bruce and Maiden were spreading their musical wings and seeing what they could do in the new musical landscape. It didn't really work out for either of them. It was the 90s. For those of you who weren't there, not only was Maiden's style of metal, what we would now call classic metal, out of fashion, but anything adjacent to it was deemed terminally uncool. The rise of grunge and alternative rock was an extinction level event for bands like Iron Maiden. Even though Dickinson tried his hardest to separate himself from his past, the public wasn't buying it. Ultimately, both acts suffered via sluggish album sales and poorly attended shows. After the public got sick of grunge, Britpop, techno, and nu metal, classic metal slowly began rising from its slumber in the late 90s and early 2000s, although it really wouldn't reach a proper resurgence until the middle of the first decade of the new century. Regardless, both Maiden and Bruce saw the writing on the wall. Despite both of them releasing some solid music, the public wasn't buying Maiden without Bruce, and they weren't buying Bruce without Maiden. Blaze Bayley, through no fault of his own, was shown the door, and Bruce was back. The band could have taken the easy road and did a retread of the classic style, recorded an album that sounded like Power Slave, released it, and lived happily ever after. Instead, in true Maiden fashion, they stuck to their guns and did something different. Brave New World does pay tribute to classic Maiden in the form of the absolutely stunning Wicker Man and The Mercenary. It also explores some of the musical direction the band took in the 90s with songs like Blood Brothers and Dream of Mirrors. And it covers new ground in songs like the powerful title track and Ghost of the Navigator. These songs mix the medieval folk flavor of the 90s Maiden with a touch of power metal and Bruce's soaring voice. It's an approach that they've stuck to for the last couple of decades. It marks the emergence of a band that is older, wiser, and not afraid to take their listeners to new places. It's a statement of where the band was in that moment, as well as a statement of where they were planning on taking things. Quite a few listeners hopped off the Maiden train after this album, claiming that it doesn't sound like the old stuff. The old stuff is still there if you want to listen to it. This is a band who has earned the right to grow their sound. Let them. Finally, there are two words that explain my love for this album better than any others: Wicker Man. Christopher Lee is my favorite actor of all time, and The Wicker Man might be my favorite Christopher Lee movie. If you've never seen it, you gotta watch it. Be forewarned, it's weird. How weird? Well, it's a horror musical, but not like Rocky Horror. It takes itself deadly seriously. It's a fantastic treatise on power, religion, and belief. It also takes place in Scotland, and Scotland fucking rules. Do not watch the Nicolas Cage version because it is shit. So, despite the fact that Iron Maiden's Wicker Man song has little or nothing to do with the film, it features a Wicker Man prominently in the video, and Bruce would get burned alive in it at the end of every set of the tour. I saw the video before hearing the album and was immediately hooked. Objective? Probably not, but there you go. Okay, so number five. There is no number five. Somehow, when I listed all these albums out and numbered them, I didn't bother to proofread my numbering. So we go from six, Peace of Mind, straight to number four, Power Slave, and then to the top three. So I fucked up. I'm sorry. This is amateur hour. I apologize. Anyway, so let's just keep going with it. It is what it is. So number four, Power Slave. There's a quote about the evolution of Rob Halford's voice. It may be either from K.K. Downing's autobiography or the one that Rob Halford himself wrote. They're both great books, by the way. You should read them. Anyway, the gist of it is this. Everyone knew Halford was gifted from the moment he joined the band. However, his voice wasn't fully weaponized until Screaming for Vengeance or so. That's the point of the book that the book makes. Maiden follows a similar track. From the opening chords of Prowler on the debut album, you know you're in for something special. The next album, Killers, builds on that debut, adding layers of sound and better production to the mix. Number of the Beast retains that London at Midnight sound, adding even better production to the mix. And as we talked about earlier with Peace of Mind, that's really where the modern Maiden sound kind of all came together. Power Slave is Maiden fully realized and kicking it into fifth gear. From the opening riffs of Aces High to the close of Rhyme the Ancient Mariner, this is a band at its creative apex, a band that can literally do no wrong. For better or worse, the Hammer Films gothic flourishes of earlier albums are almost completely gone here. The closest we get is the lumbering mummy passages on the title track and some of the more ghoulish interludes on Rhyme the Ancient Mariner. In place of the horror stories of old or tales of the Royal Air Force kicking the ever-living shit out of the German Luftwaffe in Aces High, we get a tale of Conan the Barrier, Conan the Barbarian, like revenge in Flash of the Blade, and the clever title track, which likens rock stars to mummies, both as entities wanting to be a god and live forever. There's a lightness and briskness that isn't really found on the previous albums. Maiden has always had a sense of humor about itself, but here it sounds like they're really genuinely having fun. From the instrumental Lost for Words to the almost Purgatory like Back in the Village. Purgatory is a song we're going to get to in a little bit. There's a real sense of fun here. Hell, even a song about pending nuclear doom is the most radio-friendly song on the album. And the closer, Hoofa, Iron Maiden's first epic. They'd write many more through the years, but with the possible exception of Empire of the Clouds, they'd never really duplicate the majesty of Rhyme the Ancient Mariner. There's just not a bad track on this album. All right, number three, Killers. So let's talk about Killers. I mean, what can you say about it? Arguably, this is where modern heavy metal was invented. Sure, the debut album improved upon the formula that was already established in the 70s by Black Sabbath and Judas Priest. And in songs like Phantom of the Opera, the fuse that lit metal in the 80s and long afterwards was lit. Killers is where that barrel of gunpowder exploded. Fast tempos, dual guitars, shifting time signatures, majestic instrumental intros, growls and screams. This is pretty much where it gets its start. From the get-go, Iron Maiden shows you that they're not fucking around. The Ides of March hits like a punch to the gut and does not let up as it segues into the head-pounding Wrathchild, a Maiden classic. It's like a musical journey through the dark streets of London accompanied by the feral howls of Paul Di'Anno. And let's talk about Paul. He's rightfully regarded as a fantastic singer and in some circles one of the best in the genre. He really is in his element here. While I'm of the opinion that an album like Number of the Beast or Power Slave simply couldn't happen with Diano, this album couldn't have happened without him. Don't get me wrong, Bruce Dickinson is in the top five heavy metal singers of all time, maybe even in the top three, but he's got a measured approach. As heavy as the proceedings get, he's always in control. Diano, on the other hand, feels like he's going to lose control sometime. He brings a street level crunchiness that was unique in the new wave of British heavy metal, and it's not something that Dickinson can replicate. Listen to Bruce sing Wrathchild. He does a fine job. He's pitch perfect, and he tells the story as if it was his own. Now listen to Diano. Diano scares the shit out of you, but he does it with melody and precision. It's actually pretty awesome. I was going to point out some other highlights, but every song on this album is a highlight. From the Edgar Allan Poe on bath salts of Murders in the Rue Morgue, to the almost boogie-woogie of Another Life, to the insanely precise instrumental Genghis Khan. It's a track that showcases the world-class talents of the late great Clive Burr. To the 70s progressive elements of Prodigal Son, the whole album is a masterclass in heavy metal with a beer-soaked East London sheen. But I have to point out one track, a favorite of mine, Purgatory. So there are a few moments in music history where you can point to the birth of just that genre taking a step into the next level and kind of the next page of history. Accepts Restless and Wild is one. Raven's second album, Wiped Out, is one. This album is one, and especially with this song. The tempo, the etched diamond timing, the dual leads from Dave Murray and on his first Iron Maiden album, Adrian Smith. Bands like Anthrax have been open about how much this album influenced them, and it shows. This song would fit right on an album like Fistful of Metal, Bought In by Blood, or early Overkill. It's insane. And finally, that album cover. In a band littered with a history of amazing artwork, I still think Eddie Riggs' work here is his best. A fully heavy metal Eddie holding a bloody hatchet surrounded by East London tenements building while his victim grasps at his shirt in vain. Chef's kiss. It perfectly sums up the music found therein. Damn near perfect. Number two, Number the Beast. A bit of a transitional album for the band. It retains the gothic flavor of the previous two entries. Many of the songs are themed around horror, and the music is still retaining a good bit of that East London darkness found on its predecessors. That sound is a bit fainter, but you can still hear the pub rock band that had been haunting places like the Cart and Horses since the mid 70s. At the same time, it's a more accessible album. The mix is cleaner, the song structure just a little more commercial in places, and of course, there's a new singer. And oh, what a singer he would turn out to be. So regarding the fairly unique sound of this album, it largely has to do with the dynamic of the band at the time. Harrison Smith did the lion's share of the writing as Bruce was not yet participating, allegedly for contractual reasons. So we've got the Old Maiden sound, but with a new singer. I know that in some corners of metalldom, there's still a contingent that swears that the band could have done just as well had they retained Di'Anno. As I've stated earlier, Di'Anno was and still is a talented singer. Even to this day, his voice was clear but rugged, melodic but coarse. Listen to his work on songs like Strange World and Killers, and you can see that he was multifaceted. That said, there's no way Maiden could have reached the heights that they did with him. Even if Di'Anno could have escaped his demons, Dickinson is better suited for the beast that is Iron Maiden. Listen to Hallowed Be Thy Name. There's a point where the lyric is, as I watch my life drift before me, though the end is near, I'm not sorry. Listen to the pure venom he adds to those last three words. Then listen to the midpoint and closing of the song Children of the Damned. He goes from pure opera to pure grit almost on a dime. He can hit the notes and sell the lyrics. He's as much a voice actor as he is a singer, and that really makes all the difference. There's also been a contingent that views this album as overrated. Even some members of the band regret leaving off Total Eclipse in favor of Gangland. I disagree. Like Killers before it, this album is song for song almost perfect. Let's go over it track by track. The opening track, Invaders, is a reworking of an earlier song and sets the mood not only for the album, but for the arrival of the band's new singer. Steve Harris pulls off one of his gnarliest bass lines over equally gnarly lyrics about Vikings invading England. According to the lyrics, axes grind and maces clash as wounded fighters fall to the ground. Severed limbs and fatal woundings. Bloody corpses lay all around. How's that grab you? Bruce shouts like he's a soldier trying to convey the carnage to a superior over the din. It's just bloody good fun. The next track, Children of the Damned, is another Maiden classic. Based loosely on a 1964 horror film, the song again features a master clinic by Dickinson, including a blood-curdling scream to end the track. The song also emphasizes the non-traditional but fantastic rhythm section that was Steve Harris and Clive Burr, especially in the interlude. It's followed by The Prisoner, another song steeped in 1960s British pop culture. This time it's the classic TV show, which, if you've not seen it, stop this video now and watch it in its entirety. It's fucking brilliant. It's another showcase for the amazing talents of Clive Burr, who shows his John Bonham by way of Gene Krupa chops. There's never been another drummer in the history of metal, or maybe even music, like Clive Burr. Dude hit hard, but he also had a swing jazz vibe. Nickel McBrain is great, but I really wish they could have worked things out with Clive. I would have loved to hear his take on songs like Where Eagles Dare and Aces High. Next up is 22 Acacia Avenue. This one just drips with menace. When I'm talking about Gothic Maiden, I'm talking about songs like this. Not so much the lyrics, which frankly have not aged particularly well. I'm talking about the chord progression, the time changes, the musical choices. It's the soundtrack to walking down a dark alleyway in 1880s Whitechapel. Then comes the title track, the song that made people in the Bible Belt freak the fuck out. 666, oh heavens, this band must be agents of Satan. Of course, the song is actually based on a nightmare that Steve Harris had. It also fucking slays. The story about how Martin Birch got that career-making scream out of Bruce Dickinson in the intro has been told a million times, so I won't share it here. But again, that's storytelling in the first verse. That's just not something that Diana could have pulled off, in my opinion. Another Maiden song that is basically a Hammer film set to music, and I'm here for it. Next up, Run to the Hills, Iron Maiden's Stairway to Heaven, their Detroit Rock City, their Paranoid, the song they are largely known for, and honestly, that's a shame. It's not that it's a bad song, it's not. It's just not Maiden's best song. It's not even the best song on this album, but it's got the Maiden trademarks, the gallops, the screams, the soaring guitars. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's overplayed. It's a bit like Judas Priest's Living After Midnight. It's a fine song, but when I see it come on, I hit the skip button. When I see it played live, I still have fun, but I kind of wish that they'd put it something else on the set list instead. That said, there are some songs that every band has to play, every show, every tour, for better or for worse. This is one of them. I get it. Gangland, one of the single most underrated songs in Maiden history. Listen to that drum intro. Holy fuck, that's what I'm talking about. Burr is swinging, but he's also hitting fucking hard. The music and lyrics just spit danger. Another tale of East London turmoil. This time it's a guy on the run from gangsters. He spends the entire song bemoaning his plight while looking over his shoulder. In the last verse, it's all for naught as he takes a knife to the throat. The song would have been right at home on Killers. Far from filler, I think it's an album highlight. Hallowed Be Thy Name. If you want to call this the greatest song ever recorded by Iron Maiden, I'm not going to argue with you. Like Phantom of the Opera on the debut, it highlights every one of Maiden's strengths. It's music built around a narrative. This time, it's a prisoner recalling his life as he walks towards the gallows. As he comes to terms with his fate, he shows fear, anger, defiance, and finally acceptance. The music shifts tonally with his various perspectives, demonstrated by different movements, like I said, different tones, different tempos, and different attacks. It's a masterpiece and one of the best album closers of all time. What I'm saying is this album doesn't need Total Eclipse, as fine a song as it is. This album is up there near the top of the pantheon of Maiden albums for a very good reason. It's a stone cold classic. All right, we made it. Number one, here it is. My favorite Iron Maiden album of all time, their self-titled debut. Steve Harris and later Bruce Dickinson would lament the production quality of this album, to the point where Harris himself says that he doesn't consider it a great album. Although in the same clip, he says something along the lines of, some people do consider it great, so what I know. That was a pretty shit East London accent. That was just a shit English accent, period. I apologize. But anyway, Steve was right. This album is great. Iron Maiden had been kicking around the East London pub scene since the mid-1970s. They'd gone through a number of lineup changes already before this album was even recorded. Dave Murray had been hired, fired, and rehired. They had a singer who wore Alice Cooper-style makeup and would draw a sword across his mouth while spitting fake blood. Their set piece, Eddie, was merely a head mounted above the drummer. Eddie the Ed. Get it? The one thing that kept it all going was Harris and his determination to make his band a success. Whether that meant firing guitar players who he felt weren't cutting the mustard, to firing singers, to developing a hard PG-13 or even light R-rated stage show, he'd do it. The only thing he wouldn't do is compromise his sound or vision. That determination plays out in every note of this album. By the time the album was recorded, Harris had fully realized his idea, production issues notwithstanding. He assembled a band comprised of players more than capable of backing him up. On drums was Clive Burr, who we've talked about a lot and we're going to talk about again. Clive was a truly unique player who brought some swing to his heavy-hitting style. Following the footsteps of Judas Priest, Thin Lizzy, and Wishbone Ash, we have two guitar players who both play leads. There's Dave Murray, whose howling solos have contributed to every Iron Maiden album since. Other than Steve Harris, he's the only member to have consistently stayed in the group. The other guitarist is the more than capable, if slightly more commercially minded, Dennis Stratton. Stratton would be fired in the near future over the old musical differences angle, but his guitar work is more than suitable here. It's goddamn near sublime. Listen to his guitar work during the intro to Strange World if you don't believe me. And on vocals, the one and only Paul Di'Anno, whose voice brings an additional punk edge to an album that is as punky as it is prog. And let's talk about the punk connection. Steve Harris has long been on record about not liking nor being influenced by punk rock in any way, shape, or form. However, this album has punk elements. Accidental or not, they're there. The break on Prowler, the main riff on Sanctuary, Di'Anno's delivery on the title track, punk as fuck. Then there's the album cover. It's the first of many of Derek Riggs' famous illustrations of Eddie. Here, he's sporting a punk hairdo. He looks almost like an undead version of Vivian from The Young Ones. Although Vivian sported a jacket that said very metal, so maybe that's not a good analogy. Regardless, this album has a streetwise DIY aspect that is unique to it. As for the metal aspect, well, one can argue where heavy metal began. I posit that modern heavy metal began with this album. Black Sabbath brought the art form out of the primordial ooze, adding heavy drums and distortion to what would otherwise be standard blues. Judas Priest built upon that foundation, adding twin leads and taking Sabbath's occult imagery even further, as well as adding a visual aspect with the leather and the spikes. Maiden, in my mind, perfected the formula. They took what Sabbath and Priest did one step further. They played it faster, they added more time changes, they added their own twist on the metal uniform and integrated album art that always, not just sometimes, complemented the music in the tin. When you look at the cover for Black Sabbath's Technical Ecstasy, for example, you really had no idea what kind of music would be inside. If the words Black Sabbath were on the cover, you might think it's a Kraftwerk album. The same can be said for Priest's Stained Class. But one gander at the album cover for Maiden, and you know what you're getting into. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the music. Prowler sets the stage with its punk intro over which Dave Murray's guitar howls. Remember Tomorrow is a ballad in the same way that Heaven and Hell is a ballad. The guitar work and melodies are a bit mellow, but it's obvious that something darker is lurking underneath, just waiting to explode with those Di'Anno screams. Running Free is an anthem that one might find on Priest's British Steel. Phantom of the Opera is where the band really separates itself from the pack. Opening with a weird but effective riff, the song kicks into fifth gear with a proto-thrash freakout. Through twists and turns, key changes, time changes, solos, and horror-themed lyrics, this is the song where modern metal was born, in my opinion. Transylvania is the first, and dare I say it, the best of a series of instrumentals the band would record through the years. Despite it being an instrumental, it conjures up pictures in my mind of dark castles in a distant European village and the vampires that lurk therein. It's a Hammer film set to music, and I fucking love it. Charlotte the Harlot is both a four-on-the-floor steady rocker and a prog tour de force, depending on where you place the stylus on the vinyl. Di'Anno does some of his best vocal work here, despite the lyrics not aging all that well, and that machine gun break, a hoofa. The album closes with the band's trademark. The song, Iron Maiden. The album, Iron Maiden. The band, Iron Maiden. The song has been a staple since their pub days, and they still close with it to this day while they're playing arenas and massive festivals. You've heard it. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, there it is. All of the albums, number glitch notwithstanding. I hope you had fun watching this. If you disagree with anything I said, that's totally fine. Unless you think Maiden sucks, that I'll take issue with. But as far as placement or songs or anything like that, there's so much material, and it affects people in different ways. So much of music appreciation is subjective, and I think it's cool how different music affects different people. Really, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for hanging out. I'm hoping to do another one of these with another band soon, although I have some other ideas about some different stuff. And although given how long it took me to make this one, just with the scripting, I'm not sure how soon it'll be before I do another entire band discography. But again, if you made it this far, I really do thank you for hanging in there. Like I said, this is I'm just starting to get my feet underneath me. I'm just learning how to do this. So hopefully the quality will get better, the content will get better, the delivery will get better. The more that I do. So again, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on Metal and Potatoes.